to build a stronger present and future through learning from the past. At the Filson, Richard, please tell me, how are you inspiring your community to do this?
We're working hard at it. The Filson was founded in 1884, and it's been around as a result for, 138 years. We are located in the heart of old Louisville. And if you don't live here, what that means is it is one of the nation's finest collection of Victorian homes that cover blocks and blocks between downtown Louisville and on one side, and then the University of Louisville and Churchill Downs, where the Derby is, on the other. So we're right in the middle of the action. How do we inspire this community? I think one, through our holdings. It's the most extensive collection of Kentucky and early Ohio Valley histories around, certainly in this state. And the collection dates back to pioneer times, and it goes all the way up to the present. We're continually collecting. I think that other things that we do to inspire, we put on 60 programs a year, and those are talks by major historians. The most recent one was 2 nights ago by a man named Dr. George Wright, who is one of the professors of African American history at the University of Kentucky. And he was president for many years at the largest historic black college and university in Texas. But he's a native of Kentucky, and so he's come back. And sort of rotates his time. They live in Lexington, but he and his wife come back to Louisville. That's emblematic of what we do. We also, in our programs, have the Gertrude Polk Brown lectures. Those are our flagship series, and we'll have 4 or 5 generally national historians a year come in and give lectures to Louisvillians, both in person, but then also nationally via Zoom now. Nice. Obviously, the pandemic forced us to turn on the dime, so we can.
Nice.
And we do both. About 50% of our audiences come in by Zoom these days. The other 50% are back here in person. The building is another way we relate to and encourage the community. We have an old 1910 historic building that you're taping me from. It's an old mansion on 3rd Street in Louisville. But then 5 years ago, we built a new history center, a wing, that has 2 lecture halls that can hold 200 people each. And then it holds a lot of our archival space. It won this year the American Institute for Architects annual award. That's a national award that's given, and it was given to our architects, Michael DeLeon, Ross Primer. And then, of course, the building was featured in their publications in the award. It's been very exciting for us.
Nice.
So the building, the programming, the collection, which is huge. For example, we have over 400, 500 portraits that date from early pre-Civil War times, all the way up to the present. In fact, the one behind me is just one of those portraits that we rotate them around so that all of our public can come in and see them.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We also have exhibits, and we rotate our exhibits. Currently, the 2 that are up are called A Child's World, which is about children growing up in Louisville and Kentucky and the Ohio River Valley. And then also one that we're doing called Forgotten Foundations, which are buildings that no longer exist anymore, that for one reason or another were torn down. But we have the records up and pictures of the buildings and descriptions of their history. Wow. That's what we do in
Well, you're doing a lot. So I'd love to hear about how your collection and your work has really started to foster these conversations that need to be had for change. I mean, with regard to racial inequality in Louisville and just for society in general.
Thank you. Any lecture that we give is preceded by a statement on a screen that in essence says the programs that we produce, what we print, are based on true facts. Interpretations vary. There's a man named E.H. Carr. He was a famous British historian. And he wrote a book back in the 80s, in what are called the Trevelyan Lectures. The book took those lectures. It's called What is History? And basically, that is exactly what he was saying, that historians have different ways of looking at facts and how they interpret them. And those interpretations are as vital and compelling and interesting as they would be at any given time. So you're looking at the facts, but you're also looking at how did this historian deal with this particular set of facts? I think we are very conscious of basically telling the truth, the true facts, but in as unbiased a fashion as we can so that anybody can learn and feel ennobled, encouraged, inspired, informed by the stories of the past. And indeed, our mission is to collect, preserve, and share the stories of Kentucky and Ohio Valley history. Among the ways that we do that here, I'll give you two examples. We recently started a program called Community History Fellows. We did it with the help of two foundations who provided the operating monies for it. It currently is scheduled to last this year and take us through 2023. And I think then it's been so successful, we'll continue to renew it. Right now, there are 6 individuals in the program. Of those, I'll make sure I've got my numbers right. Of those, 4 are African American, 2 are Caucasian, and they are studying their personal histories and their communities' histories. Louisville has many different communities as part of its geographic makeup. Mm-hmm. For example, the Russell neighborhood, predominantly and historically African American, damaged hugely by redlining and then by interstates being brought through it, but now undergoing a revival. Butchertown, which is where all the slaughterhouses were and many of the beer makers, is undergoing this magnificent renaissance here in the city. So we've done neighborhood series. We did a couple of years ago before COVID. The first one was on the Russell neighborhood. The most recent one is on Butchertown. We had our first Butchertown vote last week, and there are 2 more that are coming up. Mm. So the neighborhood series, and then back to the Community History Fellows, they come down here very, very frequently. They meet, they research, they talk about their histories over a meal. And then they're doing write-ups and things that will enable them to go back to their communities and teach their communities the history that they've discovered. It's been something we've really been proud of. So that's an example of reaching out to the community. Like so many cities in the United States, particularly those in the South, the whole issue of monuments has been something really fundamentally important to discuss, talk about, and we've brought in most recently a speaker who did a film on some monument controversies that we've had in Louisville for monuments that have been taken down. And it was, I thought, an extremely balanced and interesting conversation where people could hear him talk and then ask questions. So those are, I think, examples of learning from the past and how we're fostering conversations. Obviously, there's lots more that we'll get into later, but those are two. There's one more I'll tell you about right now. Recently, we got in 2 major grants for analyzing and studying our indigenous peoples collection. Back in the day when the Filson was started, the founders were focused largely on pioneer history. And that involved then the fundamental clashes of civilizations between the westwardly advancing colonists and the indigenous people who were already here. The Filson has a deep repository of Native American materials. Those include hammers, arrowheads, clay pots, some clothing, and it's been a very interesting collection because there's a problem with it. The problem is we don't currently know where everything came from. Kentucky was a cultural melting pot for indigenous people. It was a hunting ground, but there were also settlements here as well. And so a lot of these materials over the years, early years of the Filson's founding, were collected, but inadequately described and cataloged. So we hired through these grants a specialist for the next 2 years. Her name is Kelly Heiberger. She's been here since January. And she is going through the materials, and she is in conversations with the various tribal authorities. She's been down to Cherokee, North Carolina, to talk with the tribal authorities there of the Cherokee Nation, and we are convening a meeting of them later this year, and then a more substantive one, I think, is scheduled for March, where we will comply with what's known as the Native American Grave Protection Act, NAGPRA, to repatriate those materials that we currently hold that should be repatriated, that really ethically don't belong to us, and then get the tribal authorities' blessings for us to retain those materials that are legitimately Filson's. And that's it. We see this as one, an ethical process, but two, a process where we can really report backpack and involve Louisville, all of Kentucky, all of the Ohio Valley. It's exciting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what incredible work, and to take that time and that due diligence to do these things properly, and with integrity. It's beautiful to hear. Um, so let's switch gears a moment. I'd love to hear about the Jewish collections that I hear were started in 2017. How did this come together?
It was a wonderful combination of events and people. My predecessor felt strongly that it was important, and it was a very easy project when he retired and I took over. It was a very easy, wonderful project for me to get to run. Mm-hmm. We have on our board currently 3 Jewish members, and with more scheduled to come in next year. And they were fundamental in pushing this collection into existence and in helping the Filson build trust with members of the Jewish community in Louisville. What had happened was many years ago when the founders founded the Filson, they were white Protestant or Catholic men, all privileged, all highly educated. And in 1884, the memories of the Civil War were still very fresh. So they focused on, as I said earlier, pioneer history. And in doing so, they wanted to basically escape the disagreements over the Civil War and go further back into history to get away from it. In doing so, they did not focus on communities in Louisville that had been marginalized. And the Filson at that time was called the Filson Club. 30 some odd years ago, we changed the name to the Filson Historical Society. And that was really the beginning, I think, of the process of opening this place up. Mm-hmm. It is no longer a club. It is anyone can join. We have 4,000 members across the nation. And so going back specifically to the Jewish collection, Louisville has this marvelously large, productive, important Jewish community. It has for, since the founding. Mm-hmm. So we're on the Ohio River, which was and still is a superhighway of sorts, where different ethnicities, different religious groups, different races have blended over the years, different nationalities. In 2017, the Filson's board made the decision to start what we call the Jewish Collection Archive. It was going to take money, and the Filson's board committed to raising $2 million to help launch that, to fund it in an endowment. 2 major foundations, the J. Graham Brown Foundation and the Jewish Heritage Foundation, came to the forefront and said, we don't fund endowments, but we would be very happy to give you startup money. So they did, and that enabled us to bring in Dr. Abigail Glogauer, who is the daughter and granddaughter of rabbis, and has a PhD, I think, from the University of Rochester, and her undergrad is from Oberlin. She has taken Louisville by storm. She is the best hunter-gatherer of Jewish materials I've ever seen. And she is a gifted teacher. So her lectures are always anticipated, well attended. She's a great writer. And she has spearheaded the effort from the Filsons. The members of the Jewish community who have helped us raise the money have also been incredible. Those on our board, those who are not on our board that have been interested. The other thing that really helped initially was the fact that the Jewish hospital had been a path-breaking hospital in the city for many, many, many years. In many ways, including integration long before the other hospitals did. As a result, they were purchased by University of Louisville Hospital, and then that was sold, and then University of Louisville bought it. It's a contorted chain, but the bottom line is the Jewish hospital records needed to be kept and preserved, and here we were to do it. And so we have all of those records, and the sales of that hospital created this wonderful foundation that has been so generous with not only the Filson, but other entities across the community and out into the state. So that is really the genesis of it. We raised the $2 million, we invested it, and it has even given the current market fluctuations. It has rotated, it has somewhere between 2.2 million and 2.5 million as I'm speaking.
Wow.
At its height that we'd reached 2.5, I think it's right now at about 2.2. And then also that helps, the income from that helps pay for salary and for some of the things that we do with the collection, but we're still out raising operating money every year for it, and it's only going to continue to grow and get better. That has been also the inspiration for our next effort, which is with the African American.
Okay, very, wow.
And we could go to that, but you may want to know more about the Jewish collection, and maybe a family or two that have been instrumental in helping us.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And, to that point, because I've heard that Rowan Victor made a sizable contribution to the collection. And I have also heard that you may have worked closely with her husband, Carl Buzzy Victor. I'd love to hear the story there.
All right. They were incredible. I knew Buzzy also through the practice of the law and admired him. He was both like, and like Grant, his brother-in-law, extremely well connected. And they were forces for good. And just leave it at that.
Right.
But this collection is something that is wonderful to have. I'll tell you one of my two favorite parts of our collection are the Hugh Haney cartoons. That's Haynie. Hugh Haney was the principal cartoonist for the Louisville Courier-Journal in the late 50s throughout the 60s, 70s, 80s, really until his retirement. And he waited a long time to retire. His son, Smith Haney, is a circuit judge here in Louisville, retired now recently. Smith had his dad's original cartoons. They are now in the Filson's collection. And it was one of the things that I got to work on to bring in, along with one of our curators. His title is the Filson Curator, and his name is James Holmberg. But we worked with the family's lawyer, who happened to be Grant Hellman, Rowan's brother. And working with him was an absolute joy to get these things over here. It's an important, very important collection for us to have.
Wow.
All right, that's a roundabout way of talking to you about the Hellmans and the Victors and what great people they are.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share all of that.
And apologies to them if I somehow got Julia's, how the family all fits together.
Well, family is family. So thank you so much for sharing all of that. Switching gears one more time, love to go back. You'd mentioned that there is an African-American collection in the works. Love to hear just some details about that too.
Okay. We were worried that we, being the Filson, when I came in, that there were huge gaps in the collection. And those gaps in the Jewish community are now being filled with great rapidity. But the African American community, I had my doubts about. The main reason was during the times of enslavement, the narratives were written by the enslavers, not by the enslaved. Okay? The enslaved, typically, almost invariably, did not have last names. They went by their first names. So that in deeds, in wills, in inventories, in slave records, in tax records, and this is not just in Kentucky, but throughout the South. Take tax records, for example. You may see a family listed, and it would have how many white people were in that family. You list them by name and age. Then it would have how many black people were in that family unit that were owned. But it would not list them by last name, only by first name. As astonishing as that may seem in this day and age, that was the reality back then. So we looked carefully at what the Filson had in its collection and what it had done with programming and with publication. And the wonderful thing was that our programming and our publications were really good, surprisingly so. We had had on the Filson's board for a number of years the head of the African American Studies program at the University of Louisville, a man named Blaine Hudson. And Blaine was a friend of mine, but this was before I became president of Filson. We've been on some boards together. We've worked together. He's a gifted writer. He's no longer with us. He's dead. But he was a gifted writer, a gifted teacher, a gifted community resource. People loved him. And so he saw to it, I think, along with a historian named Emily Bingham, who was on the Filson's board and has been an enormous, wonderful resource for me during my time here in kind of helping me when I need an opinion or background information. And what we discovered was, yeah, there had been many, many lectures over the years on African American history and race relations. And there had been any number of publications on those same issues. And that comes right up to the present, of course. So what I was really concerned about was, well, we want to keep that up. And we want to study what we have in our collection and how we interpret it. And we can't do that through a 71-year-old white man's lens. So we have on our board, there are 4 African American members currently. That would have been unheard of at the beginning of the Filson's founding. And these are people of just immense goodwill and immense common sense and immense pride in what the Filson is doing. We are in the process of raising a sum, hopefully around $3 million to endow an African American history initiative. It would enable us to hire a curator with deep experience in the African American community, in African American studies, history, who could help build trust in the African American community and enable us to serve as a resource. It doesn't mean that we want to compete with any of the entities in this city that are deeply involved already in African American history. And in particular, Roots 101 or the African American History Center. It is more, hey, we're here, we have a deep collection. Certainly we want as many materials as you all want us to have and can't house. Or we can also help with cataloging, inventorying, analyzing what you have. So I'm excited about that. We are actively engaged in raising that money. And my hope is that mid to late 2023, we will have raised the money and we will have hired the African American history curator that can lead this, along with adequate support staff to back her or him up. Among the things that we're doing currently to make it work, are you familiar with the author Clint Smith?
I'm not, no.
Clint is one of the most important Black poets currently on the stage. He's young. He was a classmate of my daughters at Davidson College, and they graduated in 2010. He has written a book called How the Word is Passed. And it is a travel log, a travel narrative of sorts, as he goes from places of enslavement or imprisonment, such as Angola prison in Louisiana, or Monticello and Charlottesville, or Wall Street, where there were slave auctions. Mm-hmm. He's going to come in and lecture on September 27th by Zoom. He's got 2 young children, and I can't get him to come live right now, which is, I wish. but he's going to talk to us by Zoom, and our partner on this is the Louisville Urban League. And these and the conversations that I've been having, that our board members have been having with people in the African American community it's all about trust building, all about learning from each other, and broadening the scope of what the Filson Historical Society is all about. One other thing that we've done. We have this vast collection of materials called the Bullet Papers. The Bullets were a pioneer family who made money generation over generation, and owned property on which a large mall here in Louisville sits. So they have the ground leases, the various trusts. There is a Bullet mansion called Oxmoor, and it is independently run. The Filson sits on its preservation committee. And we have all the Bullet papers, lock, stock, barrel, and we have clear, title to. We have digitized a great deal of that collection, and we have cataloged, recorded it for research. Recently, in the digitization process, we took the names of the enslaved, and at its height, I think there were about 100 slaves on the property. And you can now, a researcher can come and enter the collection through the first names of the enslaved people. Go to different records and maybe do genealogical research via that way. And recently we had descendants from the Bullet family and from a family that they had enslaved, the Sanders family, in for discussions, just meeting each other, talking. And then the Sanders descendants have been through the collection through this digital archive, and you can go to our website and get into it that way. But it's a fascinating experience for me to be here as that has unfolded.
No, that's fascinating. And I love the fact that, again, all the time and care has gone into digitizing things to provide access to all of this. It's great to have these things, but to your point, if you can't share them, then
that's it. You got to share.
Yeah.
That's a very good observation on your part. You have to be able to share them.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Otherwise, what's the point in housing?
Absolutely. Let's talk about you. I would love to hear. So getting to your favorites, you'd mentioned a couple of different favorites. I want to speak about just like history in general with you, Richard. Have you always been a lover of history? And what is it that you love most about it?
Well, I grew up let me start over. I'm an Ashland Oil brat. What that means is that my father was in Ashland's management And we moved all over the state of Kentucky. Ended up when I was in the 5th grade in Hopkinsville. Hopkinsville is in the far southwest part of the state. It's maybe 20 miles from the Tennessee border. So for me, the big city growing up was Nashville, not Louisville. We could get to Nashville in an hour and a half. I think for me, Hopkinsville I graduated from high school in 1969. Hopkinsville had extreme racial tension back then. My high school integrated in 1968, 14 years after Brown versus Board of Education, 13 years after Brown 2 said this has to be done with all deliberate speed. So I guess that was Hopkinsville's idea of all deliberate speed. It was not good. And yet I learned so much from being in a public high school, very fine. During that period, are you familiar with the author Bell Hooks?
I'm not, no.
All right. Bell Hooks is she died several months ago, but she was born and raised in Hopkinsville and was a year behind me in high school. Her name was Gloria Watkins, but she is the author of many, many books, and she published under the name Bell Hooks, Bellhooks. Neither the B nor the H are capitalized. She is a very important African American writer and feminist. She describes her high school experience in a book called Bone Black. And it's moving, and it was particularly moving for me because I knew the players and I knew what was going on. I was president of my high school student body, and Gloria, as I knew her, was on the student council, and we worked closely together and became very good friends. That whole experience of growing up in a town that had been Jim Crowed and segregated for many, many years, but was basically forced into change, is one of the most important parts of my life experience. And it made me fundamentally interested in history. I, like my wife and our daughter, a graduate of one of the premier colleges. We're very lucky to have gone there. It's Davidson College in North Carolina. It's a classic liberal arts college. I was an economics major. My wife was a religion major. Our daughter was an English major. But you don't leave there without a deep, deep appreciation for what it means to be a liberally educated human being. I took as many history and English classes as I could, and have loved all the history I've studied over the years. And I just can't read enough biographies of people. That's really how I became interested in Filson when I arrived in Louisville out of the University of Kentucky Law School in 1977. And I practiced law in Louisville ever since, so that's 45 years. But as sort of my law firm has a mandatory, what we call phase down, from 65 to 70, and so Filson had been a client of mine. They were doing a search for a new president. They asked me if I would interview. I said, well, of course I would. So that's how I arrived here. But I knew the organization just through years of past representation there.
Mm-hmm.
Its being here has been a blessing. I love it.
That is awesome. I just love hearing why people are so passionate about the things that they are, and thank you so much for sharing that story.
The other thing that makes me passionate about this place is the staff. We have 30 employees, 2/3 full-time, 1/3 part-time. Mm-hmm. Quite a few are PhDs. Many more have masters, either in history or archival science or libraries. We all are devoted to the mission of the Filson. Yes, I am the oldest person on this. And part of my job is really to give them the atmosphere and the backing to flourish and to grow this organization in ways that the founders would not have imagined, but in ways that I suspect the founders, as liberally educated, smart, community-oriented people, would applaud now, or they arrive these many years later.
Wow. Well, it's quite a job, and it seems like they've got the right man doing it. So thank you again for sharing all of that. So I have one more question for you today, Richard, and it's this. For those of us who have not had the pleasure of yet visiting the Filson,
come on down.
We need to come down first. Well, you answered it pretty easily, didn't you? We need to come down. So before we arrive, please let us know, what is it that we will see when we enter your doors? And second part of that is, what might we feel?
First order of business is go to our website, www.filsonhistorical.org. And it will show you pictures of the Filson. If you would like to rent parts of the building for a meeting or an event, certainly that option's always available. And it shows you our programs. They're all on YouTube. There are all links to all of them. So you can get on there, open to the public. Our journal, which we publish quarterly, it's the Ohio Valley History Journal, which we do with the University of Cincinnati and the Cincinnati Museums, is available. Now, if you were to come, you probably want to stay in one of the bed and breakfasts nearby. Or downtown Louisville, there's some fabulous hotels. Louisville is one of the best restaurant cities in the nation. And you cannot go wrong with meals here. Of course, we have the legendary Bourbon Trail that starts in Louisville. And all the restaurants here will be happy to serve you some of that product. There are now beer makers, gin makers. It's a distilling city. We have marvelous corporate citizens, Brown-Forman, Heaven Hill, UPS. This is one of the nation's major hubs. It may be the major hub. And there are many other employers, Ford, KFC, we run the gamut. So it's a vibrant city, a city that saw very hard times during COVID, as did the rest of the nation, but right after the city basically was shut down, we also had the Breonna Taylor killing. So that has been a very important, sad, troubling, difficult time for the city. How does one move beyond that and learn from it? Our friends at the Speed Art Museum down the street have a deal, I think, with the Smithsonian, where it is a beautiful portrait of Brianna that both museums, both institutions now share. We have here at the Filson a portrait. I wish I could show it to you, but it's huge and it's on the wall in another room. It's plywood art. Like Portland, like Minneapolis, like many other American cities, during COVID, during the racial unrest, and certainly during the January 6th tragedy. Windows downtown were boarded up with plywood. And so local artists painted on those, and we've got one of the portraits. We preserved it and we bought it. And it is an absolute work of art, and it's hanging in another room with Isaac Shelby, the first governor of Kentucky, with George Rogers Clark, with all of these legendary pioneers. And she fits right in because she continues to tell the story, which is what we're all about. Now, if you were to come visit, you would come in the carriage house. You could have a tour at 2 o'clock any day of the week. You could come and research in our collection, and our research librarians would help you. You could come to an event, and frequently preceded by the obligatory white wine and cheese. The building, both the old building, the carriage house that connects it with the new building, and then the new building, each in their own way are architectural masterpieces. We're really proud of them.
Wow. Well, you convinced me. I need to find a time to get down sooner as opposed to later.
I'm afraid that I have a lawyer's penchant for talking too much, and that I've probably gone on and on and on. But you can see really how proud I am of this place, and how proud our entire staff and our board, our incredibly resourceful, fully diversified board and this institution.
Absolutely. The passion there is undeniable. And Richard, I can't thank you enough for sharing what you have. And it means a lot. Thank you so much. Thank you for helping all of us become a bit more aware now. Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.